I'm choosing a different future. Tonight changes everything.
Congratulations. I hope it was worth everything.
Everything belongs to you. Don't let anyone erase the truth.
Then it's time. No more hiding. I built every step. None of this was ever yours alone.
You owned everything all along?
She paid for every candle on that cake. She chose the flowers, hired the musicians, tipped the servers the night before. 200 people stood under the lights she strung, eating the food she ordered, celebrating the man she built. And not one of them was thinking about her. Her husband was famous. Her husband was in love with someone else. And in 3 minutes he was going to prove both in the same sentence. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. To understand why Imani Bell didn't cry that night, you have to understand what that small brass key on her wrist actually opened. The rooftop glowed gold that evening. String lights hung low over the city, and the skyline looked like it had dressed up just for her. She was 40 years old that night. Every soul on that rooftop was there, in some way, because of her, even if not one of them knew it. She had paid for all of it. The flowers, the lights, the jazz trio playing something low and careful in the corner. She had not mentioned this to a single person. That was just how Imani moved through the world. Soft, steady, behind the curtain, never on the stage. Her husband stood across the room, laughing the way famous men learn to laugh, too full, too ready, shaped for whoever was watching Marcus Bell. The whole city knew him as Marcus King, a voice like warm rain, a smile that sold out arenas. And tonight, on his wife's 40th birthday, that smile was pointed at another woman. Her name was Simone, 26, sharp-eyed, draped in white that shimmered every time she moved. She stayed close to Marcus, too close, and the room chose not to notice. A few of the older guests did, an aunt here, a cousin there. They saw how Simone's hand kept finding Marcus's arm. They saw how Imani kept her chin level and her expression soft, and they leaned to one another and whispered. Whispering is not the same as saying, and not one of those people walked over to stand beside the woman whose night it was. Imani noticed. She always noticed. She moved through her own party like a guest at it, refilling glasses she didn't need to refill, thanking people for coming to an evening she had built. The whole time, her thumb moved in slow circles over a small brass key that hung from a faded red ribbon on her wrist. You'll want to remember that key. Marcus's mother found Imani near the dessert table. Her name was Gloria, a broad woman with a broader opinion, and she had never once looked at Imani the way a mother looks at a daughter. You should smile more tonight, Gloria said. It's a celebration. Try to keep up with the energy in the room. Yes, ma'am, Imani said, and smiled. My son is on top of the world right now. Gloria watched Marcus across the floor. A man like that needs a woman who shines, not one who hides in corners counting napkins. Imani said nothing. She held the key a little tighter. Then came Renee, Marcus's sister, younger than him, prettier than she was kind, known in certain circles for living inside her brother's light. She already had her phone up, already recording, already smiling at something Imani couldn't see yet. Sis, Renee said, and the word had an edge to it. Stand over there by the cake. You're going to want to remember tonight. Why was she filming? Why was everyone glancing toward the far end of the rooftop like something was coming? Imani didn't ask. She walked to the cake, 40 candles, her own name written in icing, and she waited the way she had learned to wait her whole life. A woman she'd known since childhood passed by and touched her arm. You good girl? She asked quietly. You don't look right. I'm fine, Imani said. She gave her the smile she had been giving people for 40 years, the one that closed the door so gently you never heard the latch. Go enjoy yourself. Tonight's not about me. If only that had been true. Marcus tapped his glass with a fork. The room softened and turned. He had that pull, that gravity. People wanted to look at him, so they did. Family, he said. Friends, thank you for coming out tonight. He let the moment breathe. He was good at moments. You'll know me. You'll know my journey from nothing to the top. And a man doesn't climb that high without learning some hard truths about who's really beside him. Imani's heart began to tap against her ribs, slow and careful, like it already knew what was coming. For years, Marcus said, I told myself a good partner is somebody who keeps the books straight and the house quiet, and I'm grateful for that. I am. His eyes found Imani, and something almost gentle moved through them, which made what came next so much worse. But a king needs a queen who burns for the music, who lives in the fire with me. He reached out his hand. Simone took it. Most of y'all know Simone. What y'all don't know is that I asked her to be my wife, and she said yes. The rooftop erupted. Glasses lifted. People who had eaten Imani's food and stood under Imani's lights cheered for the woman beside Imani's husband. Renee zoomed in, laughing quietly to herself. Gloria rose to her feet and lifted her glass. Finally, she said, a real woman to match my son. Simone looked directly at Imani then, just for a second. Just long enough. No hard feeling, she said. Soft enough to seem kind, loud enough to be heard. Some people fund the dream, some people live it. Imani stood at her own birthday cake, 40 candles still burning. She watched her marriage end in front of 200 people. Then she set down her plate. She looked at the man she had loved for 15 years and clapped 3 times slowly. Her eyes were bone dry. Congratulations, she said. Just that. And she meant it the way a blade means it. She turned to the catering manager near the stairs, a quiet man who had worked her events for years. She said something nobody else caught beneath the noise. Hold the final invoice. I'll handle the rest personally. Nobody in that room understood what she meant. Why would they? They believed she was the wife who got left. They had no idea she was the woman who owned the floor they were standing on. She walked to the elevator alone. No tears, no scene. Just the slow turn of a brass key against her wrist. They mistook her stillness for surrender. The elevator doors closed. She looked down at the key in her palm, then up at her own reflection in the polished metal doors, and something in her face shifted. Not into grief, not into rage, into something quieter and far more dangerous, a decision. The night Imani Bell did not cry. She was thinking about her grandmother. Pearl Dawson had raised Imani on a narrow street in a tired part of the city, a house that leaned slightly to the left, walls thin enough to hear the neighbors argue, a kitchen, where the window wouldn't quite close all the way, so the winter came in around the edges. It was not a hard childhood in the way some childhoods are hard. It was not hungry, not cruel. But it was close, and Pearl held it together the same way she held everything together, with her hands. Pearl sewed for a living. Wedding dresses for women who could barely afford them. Church suits. Funeral clothes. She took every job that came through that door, and she charged what people could pay, which was sometimes not much. Her hands were always moving, always making something out of almost nothing, and she did it without complaint, without announcement, without ever once looking up from her needle to wait for applause. That was what Imani grew up watching. Not triumph, not spectacle, the work itself. Pearl had a saying she returned to the way some people return to a hymn. The same words, different mornings, different kinds of light coming through the kitchen window. She'd be bent over the machine, foot pedal going steady, and she'd say it like she was talking to the fabric. Don't you let your mouth do your work for you. Build quiet. Let what you make speak when your voice can't. Imani heard it so many times it stopped being instruction and became something else. The rhythm underneath her own thoughts. She was not a loud girl. She had been born with a mind that watched and catalogued and connected things, a mind that could look at a tangle and see the thread that would loosen it. Where other people saw mess, Imani saw a machine that hadn't been assembled yet. She was not flashy with this. She didn't announce it. She just kept her eyes open and her hands ready. Pearl finished dresses for women who never knew how late the lamps stayed on. She stayed up past midnight on more occasions than Imani could count, not because she had to, but because the work required it, and the work had her word. Imani would lie awake in the next room and listen to the soft scratch of the needle going through fabric, that steady particular sound, and she would think, nobody is watching this except me. And Pearl doesn't seem to need them to. It became the rhythm of Imani's whole life before she was old enough to name it. The work nobody sees, the hands that don't stop, the gift given to a stranger who will wear it to the most important day of her life, and never wonder who stayed up to make it beautiful. Imani came to believe that giving without needing the thank you was a form of strength. It was, in many ways. It asked something of you, a discipline, a kind of faith that the work itself was enough. She carried that belief into her adult life, into every corner of it, the way other people carry faith into prayer. But there is a thing about strength that Pearl never said, or if she said it, Imani was too young to understand it the way she needed to. Every strength, unchecked, becomes the exact door a thief walks through. A woman who gives without needing the thank you is a woman a certain kind of man will thank himself for finding, not because he sees her clearly, because he doesn't have to. Pearl was still at her machine the night Imani finally asked her about it. Imani was grown enough to ask, but young enough to expect an easy answer. "Why do you keep doing it like this?" she said. "The late nights, the dresses for women who'll never know. You could charge more, you could at least tell them." Pearl didn't stop sewing. The needle went through. "Baby," she said, "the dress doesn't care if nobody claps. It only cares if it fits." Imani sat with that for a long time. She took it to mean, do the work, do it right. The rest is noise. She was not wrong, but she was not entirely right either. Pearl had survived on that philosophy because Pearl was alone in her work. The garments were hers. The decision to give them away was hers, and she chose it clear-eyed every night. There was no one beside her taking credit for what she made. There was no one else's name on the label. Imani would eventually work beside someone, and she would bring Pearl's lesson with her, word for word, beat for beat, without knowing that the lesson had to be held differently when you were building something that another person would one day call their own. She believed for a long time that the work was what stayed, that you could build something lasting and it would simply exist, regardless of whose name ended up in the light. She was 23 when she heard a man singing for tips near the bus station on a cold Thursday evening. She almost walked past. She had places to be, 2 jobs, and exactly the kind of exhaustion that makes you keep your head down. But she stopped, because the voice was like something she hadn't heard before, warm as lamplight, with a catch in it, an ache. A voice that shouldn't have been singing on a corner for strangers, a voice that deserved better and somehow didn't know it yet. She stopped. She listened. She looked at him, and something in Imani Bell made the same quiet, certain calculation it always made when she encountered something broken that could be made whole. She began to plan. His name was Marcus Bell, and he was singing for anyone who would slow down long enough to listen. He worked a corner near the bus station on Thursday evenings, a spot with just enough foot traffic to make it worth the effort and just enough wind to make it brutal. He had a cardboard box at his feet, lined with a few crumpled bills people had already given, and a voice that made passing strangers stop mid-step without quite understanding why. Imani understood why. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk and listened to him finish a song she didn't know, and when he was done, she didn't move on the way everyone else did. She stayed. And he noticed her staying. They talked for almost an hour. That night, in the cold, while the last buses came and went, he was funny and restless and full of ideas he had no map for. He spoke about music the way people speak about something they know is larger than they are, with a reverence that sat a little awkwardly on him, like he was still getting used to taking it seriously. He had been told no enough times that he'd developed a habit of softening his own ambitions before anyone else could. Imani did not do that. "You're good," she said, plainly, the way Pearl had always been plain. "You should be recorded." He laughed, the way people laugh when something frightens and excites them at the same time. They found their way to each other, the way people do when they are both tired and both a little lonely, and both, in their different ways, trying to build something from nothing. He made her laugh. She made him feel seen without performing anything to earn it. Within a few months they were serious, and within a year they were talking about a future, and Imani had already started saving toward that future without telling him she was doing it. She worked days at a phone company answering billing complaints, and nights cleaning office suites downtown. Every dollar she didn't spend on rent she put aside. Not for herself. For an idea she was quietly assembling out of what she knew about Marcus and what she knew about possibility. She found the room above the barber shop by accident, walked past it on a Tuesday morning, saw the faded paper in the window, and stopped. The room was empty and dusty, with a ceiling that slanted too low on one side and wiring that looked like it had been installed by someone who'd learned from a pamphlet. But the bones were solid, and the soundproofing walls of the room below, the barber shop in itself, tiled and close, meant the space above it was naturally quieter than almost anywhere else she'd been in the building. She stood in the middle of it for 5 minutes with her hand on the wall, listening. She saw a studio. Everyone else saw a closet that smelled like drywall and old coffee. She signed the lease herself. She bought acoustic foam panels from a surplus liquidator an hour away and carried them up the stairs in 3 trips. She sourced a second-hand mixing board from a studio in the city that was upgrading equipment and talked the owner down to a price she could manage. She bought one good microphone, one she'd researched for 2 months, reading every review she could find, and the cables to run it properly, and then she learned how to use it all. She watched tutorials until her eyes went red. She read manuals that were written for people who already knew the vocabulary. She broke things and fixed the match and broke them again and went back to the tutorials and tried once more. There were nights she fell asleep in that dusty room with the soldering iron still cooling beside her hand, cheek against the second-hand board, dreams full of signal chains and gain structures. She was not doing this because someone asked her to. She was doing it because she could see what Marcus couldn't see yet, that a voice like his, given the right room and the right board and someone who believed in the work, could become something that outlasted both of them. Marcus came by on a morning when she hadn't slept, still finding the last of the foam panels to the walls. He stood in the doorway of the room and looked around at what she had built, and he was quiet for a long time. "Baby," he said finally, "why are you working so hard on a dream that's mine?" She looked at him across the room, the foam on the walls, the one good microphone on its stand, the board she'd learned to run by herself in the small hours. She smiled. "Because it's going to be ours," she said. That was the word she always used. Ours. Not mine, never mine, even when everything in that room had come from her hands and her money and her sleepless nights. She handed it to both of them automatically, reflexively, the way Pearl had taught her to give, without keeping score, without announcement, without waiting to see what she'd get back. Marcus heard the word the way he needed to hear it, and he believed it, and they recorded his first song in that room a week later, borrowed into one another's lives, 2 people, and a future they couldn't see yet. Hold on to that word, though. Ours. Pay attention to the day a man starts saying mine about a thing 2 people built together, because that is the day the ground starts to shift beneath a marriage. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens the way water gets into stone, quietly, steadily, over a long time, until one day the stone cracks and everyone acts surprised. Imani wouldn't be surprised, but that day was still a long way off. For now, the room above the barber shop was theirs, and for now she let herself believe that was enough. The studio above the barber shop became a real studio, not right away, not easily, not without more late nights and more money Imani didn't have to spare. But Marcus's voice was the kind of thing that got into people. You heard it once, and you brought someone back to hear it again. Word moved the way word moves in music, sideways, through someone who knew someone, through a show at a small venue that led to a better small venue, through a recording that got passed around on a phone. Within 2 years, they had outgrown the room above the barbershop. Within 3, they had something that needed a name. Imani chose the name. She registered the company herself. She did it quietly, through paperwork that Marcus signed without reading, because Marcus had never been a paper person, because he trusted her with the details, the way he'd always trusted her with the details, the way people trust the person who handles things when they don't want to be bothered with handling them. She listed herself as sole owner and operator. She used her maiden name, not Bell, the name she'd taken when they married, but Carter, the name on her birth certificate, the name Pearl had given her. She set it up through a structure that presented the label to the world as backed by an outside investor, a silent partner whose identity was never publicly confirmed. She did not do this to deceive Marcus in the way most people, hearing this, would assume. She did it because she knew him. She knew him the way you know someone you have watched from a corner near a bus station, someone who had been told no by the world so many times that the yes had to come from outside himself, or it wouldn't feel real. A man who was told he had a backer, an investor, a believer who'd put money behind him, that man could stand up straight. A man who was told his wife had built the machine, and he was the face she'd put on it, that man would spend the rest of his life feeling like a fraud or like a child who needed some to hold his hand. She knew Marcus. She knew what the truth would cost him, so she gave him the lie that lifts the story of the man who'd earned it, who'd climbed from nothing, who'd made himself. She made the lie possible, built it carefully, tended it, and she watched it work. When the studio came together and they recorded their first real release, she handed Marcus something, a small brass key on a faded red ribbon. "There's a lock on the main board in Studio A," she told him. "This opens it. This is yours now." She meant it in the way she meant everything, completely, without reservation. "Go make something that lasts." She went home and made a copy. She put the original in a folder with the registration documents, the deed, the ownership papers. She locked folder in a box she kept at the back of a closet Marcus had never opened, and she did not think of it again for years, because there was nothing to think about. Everything was working. The work was the thing that stayed. The label found its sound, and then its first signed artist, and then a city's attention, and then the country's. Platinum records came. Awards came. Marcus King, the name they agreed on together, his voice their center, became the kind of name that people said differently than they said other names, with a particular weight, a recognition. He was on magazine covers. He was giving interviews where he talked about his journey, his grind, his vision, the hard road up from nothing. He believed every word. Not because he was lying, but because the lie Imani had built for him was so structurally complete that it had become his own memory. The outside investor who'd believed in him first, the silent partner whose name he'd never gotten, they were real to him, abstract and benevolent, the kind of fortune that comes to the talented and the driven. He had worked hard. He had given his voice to the thing. That was true, and he had taken that truth and made it large enough to fill the space where the rest of the truth should have been. He was a self-made man. He was certain of it, and Imani watched this happen, watched the story calcify into belief. And she felt something she couldn't name for a long time. Not pride, exactly. Not regret, exactly. Something closer to the strange sadness of a person who gives a gift that can never be acknowledged, watching the recipient hold it up to the light and say, "Look what I found." She had given him the story, she had given him the key, and she had kept a copy of both. This is where things stood when the cracks started. Not in the business was sound, her name on every document, the machine running exactly as she had built it to run. The cracks were elsewhere. They were in the marriage, in the way Marcus moved through rooms now, in the way he looked at her, or stopped looking at her. A man who believes he did it all alone eventually starts to believe he doesn't need anybody at all. And when a man decides he doesn't need you, you begin to see, very clearly, exactly what he was always willing to do with the thing you gave him. Success changes people. That is not by itself a tragedy. Some changes are necessary. You have to grow into the spaces that open up. You have to learn how to carry a larger life. But there is a particular kind of change that doesn't look like growth at first. It looks like confidence. It looks like arrival, and you don't see what it's actually doing until the person standing next to you has already become someone you don't recognize. Marcus changed slowly, then all at once. He learned how to dress in the way people learn a second language, consciously at first, carefully, consulting others, then gradually, without thinking. He learned which rooms to enter and how to enter them. He learned how to talk to money, how to talk to press, how to talk to the people who decided what was important in the industry he'd built his name in. He was a quick study. He had always been good at knowing what a room needed from him. What a room needed from him stopped including Imani. It happened without announcement. She stopped being invited to the events where the right people were. When she did come, he stopped introducing her the way he used to, not dismissively, not cruelly, just quietly, the way you stop doing something when you're no longer sure it fits the picture you're trying to present. She became the woman standing near him, at parties, unnamed. She became background. She noticed. She said nothing. She had not been built to announce what she noticed. She had been built to wait, to observe, to move quietly and let things resolve in their time. And then Simone Park came into the picture. She was 24 when Marcus her to the label, a backup vocalist with a voice in the upper register and eyes that didn't miss much. She was from the kind of nothing that Imani was from, which might have made her sympathetic, and which instead had taught her a different lesson entirely. Where Imani had learned to build, Simone had learned to position. Where Imani gave, Simone calculated the value of what she was giving before she opened her hand. She found the thing at the center of Marcus that he'd never shown Imani. Not his confidence, anyone could see that. His fear. Marcus's fear was specific and old, and he'd been carrying it so long he'd built his personality around keeping it hidden. The fear said, "You didn't really do this. Someone handed it to you. You're not a self-made man. You're a man who got lucky and called it skill, and one day, in front of everyone who believed in you, the truth is going to come out." He didn't know that voice was wrong about who. He just knew it shamed him. Simone found that voice and learned to sing along with it, not to feed the fear, but to redirect it. She told him the fear was real, but the source was correctable. "You'll always be the one they say had a backer," she said to him one evening, her tone careful and sympathetic, the tone of someone delivering information they'd rather not deliver. "Don't you want to know what you're worth without somebody propping you up? Drop the dead weight, build it clean. Yours." She said it like concern. She said it like love, but Simone had not arrived at this without planning. She had grown up with nothing, and she had learned the cold arithmetic of it. Affection fades, beauty fades, but a name on a contract does not. She did not want Marcus's heart. She wanted his throne, and she had decided the most direct path to the throne was to convince the king to burn everyone who remembered that he hadn't built it. Gloria, in her own way, had been burning that same fire for years. Marcus's mother had been left once, long ago, in a way she had never fully recovered from, by a man Ma walked out and never came back. She had raised Marcus alone on pride and the fierce belief that her son would one day be too significant to be left by anyone. When she looked at Imani, quiet, uncomplicated, the kind of woman the world walks past, she saw weakness. She saw the kind of woman a man outgrows, the kind of woman who ties someone down. And she was determined her son would not be tied. She was wrong about Imani. But fear makes people certain of the wrong things. It had made Gloria certain for years, and Marcus had grown up hearing that certainty, and somewhere in him he had absorbed it. Renee didn't have a philosophy about it. Renee just wanted to be near the center of the story, and she had a gift for knowing, in advance, when the story was about to get interesting. Imani saw all of this. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything. Carefully, without rush, without saying it aloud to anyone. She saw the way Simone's hand kept finding Marcus's arm at label events. She saw how Marcus's eye tracked to Simone when he thought Imani wasn't watching. She saw how Gloria asked after Simone by name and never asked how Imani was doing. She saw Renee's phone, already up, already pointed in a direction that hadn't become significant yet. She said nothing, because she was Imani, and Imani built quiet. There is a particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself. It arrives on a Tuesday night in an empty kitchen and sits down beside you without asking. Imani had been living with it for over a year. She just hadn't let herself name it. She'd kept her hands busy and her head down the way Pearl had taught her, and she'd told herself that the work was the thing that stayed, that the ground would hold. One night Marcus came home late and she handed him a cup of coffee without being asked. She always knew when he wanted it. He took it without a word and walked away toward the other room, already looking at his phone. She stood in the kitchen and watched him go, the cup, the phone, the door, and she felt the thing she'd been not naming press up against her chest like something trying to get out. She didn't let it, not yet. She put her hands flat on the counter and breathed. There was still time. She believed that. She had to believe it. She was wrong. Marcus did not come home after the birthday. Not that night. Not the next. Imani woke alone both mornings in the house they'd lived in together for 11 years. In the bed she'd made up with the same kind of quiet care she put into everything, and she lay there in the early light and did not cry. She was not sure she was capable of crying anymore. She felt instead like something that had been wrung out, hollowed through the middle, thin at the edges. He came back on the third day, not to explain, not to sit at the kitchen table and have the conversation she had been steeling herself for. He came back to pack. She watched him move through the bedroom, pulling things from drawers, from the closet, from the south shelf, where he kept the things he cared most about, efficient and deliberate. Already gone. Before he was gone. "I didn't want it to happen like that," Marcus said. He wasn't looking at her. His voice had the particular quality of a man who'd rehearsed something and was now discovering that the rehearsal hadn't covered everything. "But you and me, we've been over a long time. You feel it too. Don't act like you don't. You announced your engagement at my birthday," Imani said quietly. "In front of your mother, in front of everybody." He didn't flinch. "That wasn't my idea." A small pause. Simone thought it would be a clean break, a new chapter. There it was, Simone thought. Watch how a man stops being the author of his own life. She had seen it happening for months and she'd still let herself hope she was wrong. She hadn't been wrong. He finished packing. He stood at the bedroom door with a bag in each hand and looked at her the way people look at things they used to love and have decided to be done with something between guilt and relief, something that wanted to be called closure. "You'll be fine," he said. "You always are." He left. Gloria came 3 days later. Not to comfort, to transact. She arrived at Imani's door in the morning with a folder under her arm and soft words that had hard bones inside them. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Imani had once signed the first lease for the studio, and she laid the folder open between them. "Sign the divorce quiet," Gloria said. "Walk away with your dignity. Let Marcus start fresh before the showcase. Don't embarrass yourself dragging this out. A pause, and then the thing she'd wanted to say from the beginning. "You were never really one of us, anyway." Imani looked at her. "I gave 15 years to your son. And he gave you a name people know," Gloria said. "That's more than a woman like you would have had on her own. Be grateful and be gone, a woman like you." Imani had heard those words in different shapes her whole life. She closed the door after Gloria left and stood with her back against it for a long time. Then Renee posted the video. It spread the way things spread now, fast and indifferent, moving through timelines and comment sections, shared by people who would never know Imani Bell's name but were happy to have an opinion about her face. Strangers picked that face apart in comments. "Look at her. Look how calm. Bet she knew she couldn't keep a man like that." The clip showed the moment Marcus announced the engagement. It showed Imani standing at her own birthday cake, 40 candles burning, and it showed her face, and the internet decided that face was funny. Imani read every comment. She read them in the dark on her phone after midnight, one after another, the way you keep pressing a bruise to see if it still hurts. It still hurt. Every time. Something in her began to go out. She stopped sleeping properly, she stopped eating much. She moved through her days like a woman walking underwater, the ordinary things, coffee, mail, the plant in the window that needed watering, taking twice the effort they should have taken. The Imani who held things together, who kept the details organized, and the lights on, and the foundation solid beneath everyone around her, she went quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. This was not the quiet of a woman working in the dark. This was the quiet of a woman who had stopped believing the work mattered. The worst of it was what happened in her own head. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror one morning and looked away before she could finish looking. She heard Marcus's voice in her memory. A king needs a queen who burns, and she thought, did I ever burn? Had she ever been anything other than the wood other people set on fire to keep warm? She had spent 15 years giving without keeping score, and she had called it strength, and now she was beginning to wonder if it was only what it looked like from the outside. A woman who stayed because she didn't know how to demand better. She didn't tell anyone how bad it got. Of course she didn't. The woman who carries everyone never learns how to be carried. She had no practice for it. She didn't know the words. One night she sat down at the kitchen table with the divorce papers in front of her. Gloria had left them. They were straightforward documents, businesslike, reasonable on their face, if you didn't know what they were actually asking her to surrender. The pen was in her hand. Her name needed to go on a line at the bottom. She sat there for a long time. She told herself, the way she had told herself her whole life, quiet is not the same as weak. She said it out loud once to the empty kitchen. Her voice cracked on the last word. She picked up the pen. She was one breath away from giving them everything. She didn't sign. Not that night. Not at the kitchen table. Something stopped her short of the line. Not resolve, not strategy, just a sudden absence of the ability to do it. Like a door that wouldn't quite close. She set the pen down, pushed back from the table and drove. She didn't plan where she was going. She drove the way people drive when they need the movement more than the destination. Through the city, through the late quiet of it, streetlights going amber, the radio off, nothing but the sound of the engine and the occasional rush of a passing car. She found herself on the east side without deciding to go there. She parked in front of the barber shop. She looked up at the window above it. The building was old now. The barber shop itself had changed hands twice, but the room upstairs, the room the label no longer used, the room that hadn't been needed since they outgrew it years ago, was still there, still accessible, because Imani had never stopped paying the lease on it. She hadn't been able to explain that to herself. She just hadn't been able to let it go. She went upstairs. The room was dark and cool. She turned on the single bulb above the mixing board, still there, still the same second-hand board she'd sourced and learned to run by herself, neither upgraded nor discarded. The foam on the walls, the stand where the one good microphone had been, empty now, the particular smell of a room that has been used for something real and remembers it. She sat down on the floor. She took the brass key from her wrist and held it in both hands. She said it the way Pearl used to say things, not performing it, not announcing it, just stating it plainly to the room. Quiet is not the same as weak. A pause. Her voice didn't hold. Is it? She had come there with the papers. They were in her bag. She took them out and put them on the floor in front of her. She picked up the pen. That was when the door opened. His name was Otis Green. He was 61 years old and grey at his temples, and he walked with a slight hitch in his left knee from an old injury that had never fully healed. He had been the first person Imani ever hired before she'd even officially opened, hired to run the board in the original room, to be the hands on the technical side while she was handling everything else. He had watched the label grow from this room to a real studio to an industry name. He had been at every important moment without ever being visible at any of them. He was the only living person besides Imani who knew the whole truth. He had not empty-handed. He set a worn folder on the floor in front of her, unhurried. Without explanation, he opened it. Inside were the original papers, the registration documents from the first filing, the deed to the company, the ownership papers that had never changed, had never needed to change, her name on the line, her maiden name, Carter, on every page, every paragraph, every clause that mattered. Beneath the folder, wrapped in old cloth, was a reel of tape. Aged, the housing yellowed at the edges. Marcus's first recording. Made in this room, on this board, on the one good microphone, back when there was no label and no plan and no investors, real or invented. Just the two of them and a Tuesday evening, and a voice that deserved better than a corner near a bus station. Otis didn't sit down. He stood above her and looked at her, and his expression was not pity. It was something older and sturdier than pity. "You forgot something," he said. She looked at the folder. Her name, everywhere, in her own handwriting, and in the official typeface of documents that had been filed and processed and notarized and held. Her name, unambiguous, unarguable. "They think they're taking something from you," Otis said. His voice was quiet in the way the room was quiet. "But baby, they can't take what was never there to touch." He let that sit for a second. "You didn't marry into this. You didn't stumble into this. You made this with these two hands." While he was learning to wave at crowds, Imani looked down at her hands. She turned them over. She had not thought of them, in a while, as anything other than the hands that had stopped being enough. "You forgot who you are," Otis said simply. She sat with that. She looked at the papers for a long time, on every line, her work on every line, the whole architecture of it in her handwriting and under her signature. The lie she had built to protect Marcus's pride had the strange effect from this angle of proving her own. Everything he had ever called his had been built on her name. Everything she had ever called theirs had always been legally, completely, entirely hers. She looked at the tape reel. She set down the pen. She took up the key. There is a thing that happens when a woman who has been crying stops crying. It is not relief. It is not peace. It is quieter and more specific than either of those things. It is the moment a decision finishes forming, the moment the internal argument ends and is replaced by something that doesn't argue, that simply knows. Imani stood up slowly. She looked at the room, the foam, the board, the empty stand where the microphone had been. She looked at the frame of the window and the light that came through it, and the view of the street below that she had looked at on 100 nights when she was exhausted and still going. "I built you," she said, to the room, quietly, "and I'm going to finish this." She folded the papers back into the folder. She set the tape reel carefully on top. She picked up both and put them under her arm, the way you carry something you know you are going to need. She went downstairs and drove home. She made one phone call that night, brief, to confirm a time and a place. She slept for the first time in weeks. In 4 days, the label's anniversary showcase was going to happen, the biggest night of the industry year, and Marcus King had already told everyone it was going to be a coronation. He wasn't wrong about that. The label's anniversary showcase was the largest event the industry held that year. Investors, press, artists, executives, everyone who mattered in that world packed into one bright room to celebrate what Marcus King had built. He had planned the night carefully. He would perform. He would announce the label's next era. He would debut Simone not merely as his fiancée, but as the new face of the company. The signal that a new chapter had begun, that the old weight had been set down, that Marcus King was finally, fully, only his own. He had talked about it in interviews. He had described it, to people who asked, as the night he stepped all the way out into the light. He was not wrong that something was about to happen. He was wrong about which direction. Simone came in white. Gloria took a seat in the front row, composed and proud, the way a woman looks when she believes she has maneuvered everything into exactly the right configuration. Renee worked the room with her phone up, already building the narrative, already composing the captions in her head for the thing she was about to document. Nobody expected Imani. Why would they? The joke from the birthday video. The quiet wife who had been left behind, who had clapped 3 times at her own humiliation and gone home without a scene. She had been written out of the story weeks ago. She was the past tense. People had moved on. Then the doors at the back of the room opened. She walked in. Not fast, not with performance. She came in the way she had always moved, with the kind of calm that doesn't ask permission, that doesn't announce itself, that simply occupies the space it enters and allows the room to catch up. She wore something simple and dark, nothing designed to announce itself. Her hair was back. Her hands were at her sides. The folder was under her arm. The room turned, not because she was loud, because of something in the way she moved, something certain, the way certainty reads from a distance, even before you understand the cause of it. People glanced over their shoulders. Conversation stuttered. She walked through the crowd the way water finds its own level, without force, without hurry, without a doubt about where it's going. She moved toward the stage. Marcus was already up there, the spotlight on him, exactly where it always was, exactly where he liked it. He had Simone beside him, her hand in his, and he was speaking into the microphone with the ease of a man who'd spent his whole adult life learning how to hold a room. He was saying something about the future, about the era ahead, about what it meant to have built something real and stood in front of it without apology. He said, "Some people fund a dream, but only one person lives it." He smiled when he said it. He couldn't help the dig. He probably didn't think it was a dig. A second microphone opened. The sound came through the room's speakers, even unhurried, carrying to every corner of the space. "Before anyone signs anything tonight," Imani said, "I think you should all meet the actual owner of this label." The room turned again, toward her voice. Heads swiveled, press lifted their cameras. The Tautnaus, investors who had been leaning back in their chairs, leaned forward. Marcus's smile locked in place the way a smile does when the mechanism that keeps it moving stops working. He found her in the crowd. She wasn't hard to find. She was walking toward the stage. "Imani," his voice was low, just off the mic, the tone of someone trying to contain something that had already gotten out. "What are you doing? Get down." She didn't get down. She walked to the stairs at the side of the stage. She climbed them slowly, not dramatically, not performing hesitation or performance, just at the pace of a person who knows where they're going and has already decided that nothing is going to stop them. She walked out of the darkness at the edge of the stage into Marcus's spotlight. She stood beside him. He was a few inches taller. He had the spotlight. He had the microphone and the room's attention and 15 years of practice stage presence. He had all of it, and he stared at her with something that was trying to be anger but had fear underneath it, the particular fear of a man who has just realized, 2 seconds ahead of everyone else in the room, that something enormous is about to happen. "You've been telling this room a story for years, Marcus," Imani said. Her voice was even, not cold. She had never been cold, just certain. "About a man who built an empire from nothing. It's a beautiful story." She let one beat pass. "I should know." A murmur moved through the room. "I wrote it." She lifted her wrist. The small brass key on its faded red ribbon caught the light of the spotlight, the same key she had held through the birthday party, through the nights in the dark, through the floor of the original studio. The room saw it. A few people already understood. They were looking at something that mattered. Marcus looked at the key. Something moved across his face that was not quite anger and not quite grief and had no clean name. She reached into the folder under her arm. She pulled out a single document and held it toward the man standing in the booth across the room, Otis, who had been there from the first night in the first room, who had come with the folder and the tape reel and the words she needed to hear when she'd forgotten who she was. Otis looked at the technician beside him and nodded. The giant screen behind the stage came to life. The documents filled the screen behind them, floor to ceiling, projected large enough that everyone in the room could read them without moving from their seats. The registration papers, the original deed. The ownership structure of the label, every subsidiary, every holding, every account that the machine ran through, line after line after line, one name, not Marcus King, not an outside investor or a silent partner or a backer from somewhere else. The name on every document, in every clause, under every signature that had ever moved money or authorized a release or approved a deal, her name, her maiden, Carter, Imani Carter Bell. The room read it, slowly, then all at once, like a wave. You could feel it move, first the section closest to the screen, then back through the crowd, the information spreading and registering, and landing differently for different people, but landing hard for everyone. The investors who had been leaning forward leaned further. The press photographers lifted their cameras. Someone near the back said something low that spread into a murmur, that spread into the kind of charged silence that lives just before a room decides what to do next. Simone's white dress suddenly looked like a costume she'd worn to the wrong party. Imani let them read. She stood in the light beside Marcus and she let the room take its time. She had spent 15 years in the quiet. A few more seconds weren't going to cost her anything. Every royalty check you ever signed, she said. Her voice was not raised. It carried easily because the room was listening. Every platinum record on that wall, the masters, the catalogue, the contracts, the name itself. I hold all of it. And with one signature tonight, I decide what happens to every last piece, including the part with your face on it. She wasn't saying this for cruelty. She was saying it because it was true, and because the truth had been withheld long enough, and because the people in this room who had decisions to make deserved to make them on correct information. But she was also saying it to Marcus, and he knew it, and he heard something beneath the words that none of the investors or press or executives around them could hear, the full weight of what he'd thrown away. Not a backer, not a business arrangement, not a quiet wife who kept the books and the lights on, the ground. He had been standing on her the entire time, and he had been too certain of himself to look down. He stared at the screen. He looked at her name, repeated and repeated and repeated in the official language of ownership, irrefutable, notarized, filed with the county and the state and the relevant regulatory bodies years ago. The name he had never thought to check. The name on the papers he had never read. The story he had told himself every morning for 15 years. I did this. I climbed from nothing. I made myself, cracked open in front of 200 people who had come to watch him be crowned. That was what you watched in his face, not the loss of a company, not the legal consequence, the loss of the story. The story had been the floor under everything else, and he was watching it give way, and he was standing on it when it went. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in his professional life, in a spotlight, with 200 people watching, Marcus King had nothing to say. Imani looked at him for a long moment, not with triumph. Something older and heavier moved through her expression, something close to sorrow, close to pity, because she had loved this man for 15 years, and she could see clearly now what those years had cost both of them. I gave you that for 15 years, she said, quietly, still not raised. I let you feel like a man who did it alone. Because I loved you, and because I thought that's what love was supposed to do. She shook her head just slightly. Make yourself small so he could feel tall. She looked at him one last time. So go on, Marcus. Make yourself from nothing the way I once did for you. She set the microphone down on the stool beside him, gently, the way you set down something that has already ended. Simone took one small step away from Marcus. Pure instinct, the body knowing before the mind that it should not be standing next to this particular fire right now. Gloria's carefully prepared toast dissolved in her throat, unspoken. Renee, slowly, lowered her phone. Some moments a person knows, deep and honest in themselves, that they should not be filming. This was one of those moments. Imani turned and walked off the stage the same way she'd walked on it. No hurry, not looking back. Whole in a way she had not felt in a very long time. Whole in the specific way of a person who has said what needed to be said and no longer needs the room's response, the The room let her go. It did not erupt. It did not cheer or jeer or lean into whatever came next. It sat in the particular quiet of 200 people who had just understood, all at once, that they had badly miscalculated who they were dealing with. Backstage, in the narrow corridor, away from the lights and the crowd, Imani stopped walking. She stood alone for a moment. The noise from the other side of the wall was distant, barely real. She looked down at the brass key in her palm, the original, the one she had kept, the one that had been on her wrist at the birthday party, and on the floor of the old studio, and now here, in her hand, in this corridor, in this ending that had been building for 15 years. She closed her hand around it. She smiled. Not for the room, not for any camera, not for anyone, at all. Just for herself. The fall, when it came, arrived the way Imani had always known things arrived. Quietly, in stages, without the thunderclap anyone had been waiting for. By the end of that week, the investors had gone home. Not dramatically, not with speeches, they simply closed their folders and stopped returning calls. You don't commit capital to a man who didn't know he didn't own the building he was standing in. Marcus went from the industry's celebrated self-made king to a cautionary tale people whispered at parties. The man who got exposed at his own showcase, the man who had never read the papers. The distance between those two things was one evening and one screen. Simone came to collect her things from his house a few nights later. She did not soften it. I can't do this, she said. I came here for a future. There's no future here anymore. You said you loved me, Marcus said. He sounded, for a moment, like the young man on the corner near the bus station, unguarded, genuinely confused. Simone paused at the door. She looked around the large, dim house that had once felt like a throne room and now felt like a place that had been abandoned before anyone had gotten around to leaving. Love doesn't keep the lights on, Marcus. She glanced up at the ceiling. And right now yours are off. Then she was gone. She had never wanted him. She had wanted the position, and there was no position left to want. Gloria came to Imani's door once. She was smaller somehow. The quality of her had changed, the specific size she had always occupied in a room. She stood on the porch and she said, without preamble, the words that had clearly cost her the most she'd had to spend in a long time. I judged you wrong. I thought you were weak. Imani looked at her for a long moment. No, ma'am, she said. You thought quiet meant weak. That was your mistake. A pause. It was never mine. She let the old woman stand with that, the way Gloria had once let Imani stand alone at her own party. Renee deleted the birthday video. The internet kept it anyway. Because the internet does not delete things, it only recontextualizes them. The clip of Imani clapping 3 times at her own birthday, the clip Renee had posted to humiliate, became the clip people watched to understand what composure looks like when it has something behind it. Renee had filmed her own family's unraveling and posted it with a laughing caption. She would spend a long time living with that. Marcus came once, months later, to the old studio above the barber shop. He stood in the doorway like a stranger to his own history. He looked at the room, the foam, the board, the empty stand, and something on his face cracked open in a way that had nothing to do with performance. I don't know how to start over, he said. I don't know who I am without all of it. Imani looked at him. She held every card. She could have walked him to the door and locked it behind him, and the whole world would have called it justice. She could have given him nothing. She gave him one thread. You still have your voice, she said. That part was always yours. Nobody gave you that. I never touched it. She met his eyes. But you're going to have to use it as a man this time, not a king, a man from the bottom. Honest about what he is. He nodded. Slowly, he left. Word came later that he was singing again. Small rooms, no entourage, no crown, just a voice starting from the floor. Maybe he'd make something real. Maybe he wouldn't. That was his road now, and his alone. Imani had finally put it down. She bought the building. She kept the first room exactly as it was. The foam, the second-hand board, the one good microphone on its stand. She had one thing added. On the wall, in a simple frame, she hung the brass key on its faded red ribbon. Not hidden anymore, not a secret. Just the truth, visible to anyone who walked in. A young woman from the neighborhood found her way to the studio that winter. Big voice, no path for it, the way Marcus had once had no path. Imani opened the door. She taught her the music and the business both, in the same breath, without separating them. She made sure this girl would never have to hide behind anyone. Sign your own papers, Imani told her one afternoon, the key on the wall behind them. Read every line, and never let anybody convince you that the quiet work isn't the real work. The young woman looked at her. Weren't you scared, she asked, when they laughed at you, when they said all those things? Imani thought about it. She gave it the honest second it deserved. I didn't lose everything, she said. I lost the people who never really saw me. And baby, that's not losing. That's the storm doing your cleaning for you. She touched the frame on the wall. The key inside it caught the afternoon light. Imani stood at the window of the room she had built and watched the city go gold in the evening. It was the same city it had always been. She was not the same woman. She was lighter. She had not known, until now, how much she had been carrying. She was finally, fully, only herself. If this story moved you, if you've ever been told your quiet work didn't count, if you've ever been the person holding everything up while someone else took the bow, leave a comment below. Tell me, did Imani make the right call? Did Marcus deserve the one mercy she left him, or should she have walked away with all of it? I read every reply. I'll see you in the next one.